Setting a budget and understanding the trade difference. Hello, Jake Huling here with Aircraft Sales Advisor. I'd like to welcome you to the 6th video report in a new series called 9 Steps to Successful Sale or Purchase of Your Plane. In the last report, we covered one of the more confusing factors when determining a plane's value, and that is aftermarket upgrades. We looked at upgrades from 3 different perspectives. 1, if you own a plane with upgrades, what they are worth. 2, if you own a plane and are thinking of adding upgrades, what makes the best type of upgrades and where you should spend your money. And 3, if you are buying a plane, what type of upgrades you should be looking for and how much you should pay for them. In today's report, we're going to cover budgets, realistic expectations, and the 3 most common mistakes that sellers and buyers make in this area. In addition to that, we're going to talk about the importance of keeping your eye on the trade difference when both selling and buying a plane. And what in the world is a build plane? So let's get right down to it. Setting your budget. 2 of the most common and potentially challenging questions when setting a budget are: 1, how much of what we want and need in a plane can we get with our current budget? And 2, how much of what we're hoping to get for our current plane is realistic? If that sounds at all familiar, you are not alone. And these 2 very common questions actually both have very similar answers. So let's start by taking a look at the 3 most common mistakes buyers and sellers make in this area. Number 1 is what I originally paid for my plane. Now, stay with me because this is one that gets a lot of owners in trouble, and I'll give you an example of how it often happens. Let's say an owner paid $5 million for their plane when they bought it new, or well, used, let's say used, and now it's 3 to 5 years old, and they would like to get close to what they originally paid for it. After all, a new one cost $7 million, and mine is in excellent condition, and the paint and exterior still look great. So shouldn't I be able to get at least close to what I paid for it? And I can honestly understand their thinking, because who, after all, wants to lose money? But here's the thing, there are a ton of factors that come into play here. Condition is one of them, most definitely. And so is how much time you've put on the engines and airframe, how many years you've had the plane and its age, if you've added any upgrades, and the biggest one is what the market is currently doing. The good news is I do cover all those topics in previous reports, and I'll make sure to add links to them after the report so you can check them out, because I cannot stress enough how important, accurate, and realistic expectations are in order to have a successful outcome with the sale of your plane and the purchase of your next. Otherwise, you end up down a road that just leads to frustration and disappointment. Number 2, what I need to sell my plane for. Another way I see owners deciding the sale price for their current plane is by basing it on the cost of their next one that they want to buy. They'll take what they believe the next plane will cost, subtract the additional amount they're willing to pay above the sale price of their current plane, which is the trade difference, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. And whatever that amount turns out to be is the sale price they want to set for their current plane. Now, it might surprise you to know that that way actually can work if it's done properly. And keeping an eye on the trade difference is a way you can make up for the sale price of your plane being lower than what you had hoped. If the trade difference is greater than your budget or what you'd like to spend, you can make that up by finding a plane. Almost always it ends up being an off-market plane that you can purchase for a wholesale number instead of a retail price to make up some of that trade difference. For this approach to be a success, we need to keep our eye on the overall transaction, how much you will have paid out after both the sale of your current plane and the purchase of your next one, which leads us to the 3rd most common mistake buyers and sellers make. What my next plane will cost. Here's how a lot of buyers decide what their next plane will cost and what their current plane is worth. They'll look to one of the more popular listing sites, like Controller, for example, to see what planes are selling for. And that's the mistake. The prices you see on those sites are not what the planes are actually selling for. In fact, there are several things you should know about those type of sites. There's nothing wrong with them, it's just important to know this. The first one is the listed price is almost always higher than what the market will support and even what the the seller would actually take for their plane, which is great news if you're buying and can be very disappointing if you're selling, especially if this was the only source that was used to determine the value of your current plane. Number 2, it's important to know and remember these sites are not the only place you can find a plane to purchase. An off-market plane, like we talked about earlier, that isn't listed on any of those sites can often be a much better option. You or your broker get to work directly with the owner of the plane instead of going through an additional broker. It can be faster, less expensive, and it can help shrink that all-important trade difference down to fit within your budget. And the 3rd thing to remember when looking at those popular listing sites is what I call a build plane. This is usually an excellent option if you are looking for a plane with a lot of upgrades, especially upgraded engines. But this is a plane you won't find on any of these listing sites. In fact, the build plane doesn't actually exist yet. What do I mean? Well, this is something I do for clients and customers where I look for a plane with stock engines that are as close to their overall times as possible, if not completely ran out. Then we change out the engines with an upgraded version, new paint, new interior if that's important or needed, and any other upgrade they might want for performance and entertainment. The result is a brand new looking, high performance, custom plane that fits your tastes, wants, and needs and saved you a bunch of money. It's a great option. And lastly, let me leave you with this. It's very natural for us as humans to look at each of these areas separately rather than as a whole. We tend to focus on that one problem or challenge that's kind of right in front of our face, and that, of course, puts us in danger of missing the bigger picture. When going through this process, it's so important to look at to look at the end result instead of each individual process in order to have a complete success. If you sell for a good price, but you buy too high, you're over budget. And likewise, if you're unable to sell your plane for the price you were hoping, then you're not able to get the next plane that you really wanted. So my advice to you is always look at this as a whole and decide if you want or need any extra help. If you want to do this on your own, be honest with yourself and make sure you really have the extra time commitment that's needed to have a successful outcome and get your plane sold for the top of what the market will support. Find your next plane for a wholesale price and to make sure it's the best one in the world for you. In my next report, we're going to take a look at the market, and I'm going to show you the 3 most important pieces of information you will need to determine the value of your current plane and to find out what your next plane will actually cost. So that's it for this report. Thank you so much for joining me on this 6th step in my newest series of reports called 9 Steps to a Successful Sale or Purchase of Your Plane. This is Jake Huling with Aircraft Sales Advisor, and I do look forward to seeing you on the next one.